And a pleasant Wednesday evening, Wednesday night, maybe Thursday morning where you are. And welcome to Politics 101. David Hines here with you. And tonight we are going to be talking budget. I expect Elson Lowe, the PNC economic advisor to the opposition leader, I think, is his designation. We're going to clear that up when he comes there, but he's a young economist and he is on top of things, and he's going to be here to talk us through the budget. I've described the budget as another friends and comrades budget. Friends and comrades budget. We're going to talk some more about that. And we're going to talk some more about that. So welcome to Politics 101. Welcome to Politics 101. David Hines here, of course, with you. And if you're joining us from Georgetown, Guyana, welcome, the capital city of our beloved country. Welcome to Politics 101. You're joining us from the east coast of Demerara, where I am from. Welcome to the beautiful people of Plaisance, Bedford, LBI, Triumph. We often forget that little village. It's not always in the spotlight, BV, Triumph, LBI area. Welcome down to Politics 101. Hello, if you're joining us from the quarantine. Welcome down to the show. I know our brother out there in number 52, Mr. Morgan. Welcome to Politics 101. How about if you're joining us from the Essequibo Coast, Essequibo Islands, our largest county, and the one that the Venezuelans want to take away from us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining from the interior, from the Northwest, from Region 9 out there in the Rupununi, Region 8, Region 7. Hello, if you're joining us from Bartica, the gateway, if you will, to the interior. Welcome to Politics 101. And how can I forget the people of Linden? Wonderful people of Linden, wonderful community. Welcome to Politics 101. Tessa says, Tessa Waterman says she's watching from South Ramville Gardens. I think that name looks quite familiar. Might be a teacher, I think. Welcome to the people from South, one of our housing schemes, the ones created under the Fox-Burnham regime, and wonderful people there. Sherrod is from South. Welcome to all the people joining from down in South, in East, in West. See, I know I'm not a tongue man, but I know my way around tongue. Welcome to you if you're joining from Georgetown. It's so wonderful to join us. June, welcome June, welcome to Carol. Carol is watching from Linden. Carol is watching from Linden. In a couple of months, Linden will, of course, light up with the Linden Tongue Week. It's been taking a little beating up there because of the pandemic, but welcome to the people of Linden. I have to make my way up to Linden. When I get back to Guyana in a couple of weeks, I plan to Linden on the agenda. I haven't been to Linden in a couple of years, a year or so. I will certainly be visiting Linden with our team. If you don't go to Linden, you're not in the game. So, we have to go to Linden. In America, they say if you're running for anything or if you're into politics and you're running for president in America, you have to go to Iowa and New Hampshire. The Linden is like Iowa, you got to be there, you got to go there if you're interested in politics. But because Linden has been under siege, as one expects under this government. So yes, in a couple of weeks, I hopefully will be there in Linden and hope to see a lot of you Lindeners who are on the program here. 101 is on. Please share the link, let everyone know that we're ready to roll. We're going to be talking economics with Mr. Elson Lowe. Mr. Elson Lowe, as you all know, I have a lot of time, a lot of respect for that young man. I think he's very intelligent, very on top of things. I'm getting old now, so I have to say, I think he's a very bright guy, Old people said about bright bad, and he's backstage and ready to roll. Friends and comrades budget. Friends and comrades budget. What's in the budget for poor people? What's in the budget for Amerindians? What in the budget for Black people? What's in the budget for poor Indian people? Compared to what's in the budget for the big boys and the few big girls. The one who use their lines to get by in Guyana. Kwame Potter, one of my mentors from Buxton, had a poem. He said the big boy use their lines and the big girls use their loins. I remember as a young man, we doing that poem, talking about the privilege of some people in society. Remember, a budget is money you plan to spend and money you expect to bring in. As simple as that. If you're a homemaker, a housewife, a house husband, budget, you deal with that every day. What do you spend on? You got 5 children, 6 children. How much you spend on each child? Guyana is the land of 6 peoples. You got 6. What you doing for your children? Are you spending the money in 2023 equally on your 6 children? Or are you spending it just on the big children and not on the little children? Welcome to Politics 101, Mr. Vibert, the man from East Bank, Grove East Bank. Good evening, Mr. White. Very, very, very conscientious and loyal supporter of our programs. Good evening. Mr. Elson Lowe is here, and we're going to be talking about the budget. 700, almost $800 billion. 41% increase, I think. If all things are equal, the age pensioners should get 41% increase. I hear they get a 5,000. And my mathematics not too good. But I know from the naked eye, 5,000 don't represent 41%. I spend a lot of time in the market. While I was in Guyana over the last 5 weeks. And I know shallot and celery was, depend on where you go, it was $3,500 or $4,000 a pound. $5,000 for all age pensioners, $4,000 a pound for shallot and celery. I am not a mathematician. I am not an economist, but let's figure it out. Good evening, Denise. Good evening. My sister Denise. We used to call her officer. She was an officer of the law, and we are very respectful in Buxton. So when Denise is off duty and she came out to hang out, we pay her due respect. Officer, how are you doing? And the officer never drink anything more than shandy. Officer, what you drinking? Shandy. Shandy. She was a real officer. The discipline of the officer. And she never shoot nobody. She never harass nobody, even though she was an officer. And that is what we want our young officers to do. To serve and protect. That your fellow villagers and fellow countrymen and women should not be afraid of you. Good evening, Heather. Good evening. Yes, Officer Booker never terrorized anybody when she was in the force. And that is why we paid her respect. Officer. Welcome down to Politics 101. Patricia Grace Andy, welcome down to our program. You know what? Let me begin, Mr. Lowe. Good evening, my young brother. How have you been?
Good evening. How are you? I'm always happy to be on, always happy to have a chat with you.
And we are always happy to have you. Okay, we seem to have gotten it. Yes, my brother, Lowe, the budget, I assume that you would have it, and at least you would have done some preliminaries of what that budget has inside.
Yes,
First
absolutely.
of all, give us your general comment, and we'll get down to some specifics.
Well, you know, the way that I think it's so important for us to frame things this year, as we see yet another year where we anticipate tremendous growth coming off the back of a 62%, as we saw in the budget, 62% growth last year, is that this year Guyana will have a higher per capita GDP than Trinidad and Tobago. It will shortly be there. Now, that indicates that we should really start to see robust measures to improve people's quality of life. And you know, I think a lot of Guyanese were holding their breath to see whether this budget would actually yield a lot of those measures. I think many people were anticipating something. But sadly, we've kind of got a budget that has, well, I'll put it this way. I'm not surprised at all at what was in the budget. It's exactly what I expected it to more or less to look like. Of course, the government is spent quite aggressively. I think even the overall totals are a bit higher than I had anticipated. But it is not something, unfortunately, to be joyous about, because what they've spent on has not been where really they should be spending. So we started off the year in a position where there's tremendous anticipation. We started off the year bearing in mind that we're going to surpass Trinidad in terms of per capita GDP, income per capita. But as the year goes on, and as we look more closely at what is happening with the budget, and as to what Guyanese have to look forward to, it is nowhere near. It is not at all approaching the type of optimism that you might have seen at the beginning of the year. Now, for one, the budget, and you'll recall, some viewers will recall the last year's budget when you total everything up, the supplementals as well as the budget, was 50% larger than the previous year's budget. And this budget is now 41% larger than last year's first budget, the main budget that's announced at the beginning of the year. Now, what that means is that we've seen a sharp increase in government spending. The question then is, what has the spending been on? What has the government been spending all of this money on? That is, I think, the core question. And when we look at the way that the spending has broken itself out, and the emphasis that the government has had, that I think makes there are a couple of areas where we've really got to pump the brakes here, because the government is getting totally carried away, and in fact is actually going against what its own pronouncements, its own indications as to what it intended to do. It is massively gone against those, and that I think is very worrisome. One way that we, I think, must reflect on this budget, and we'll lean into various cost of living questions, various questions as to what pensioners are getting, various questions as to what other groups within society who require a lot of assistance are not getting. But the way I think really to kick off the discussion on the budget and to help us to grasp what is most troubling about the budget is this. The government has indicated an intention to spend 20% of the national budget annually on education. That's what they've said last year. When before we had oil involved in our national budget spending, that's in 2021, we saw 15% spent of the budget spent on education. The first budget that had oil last year, we saw 13% spent on education. So they shrank the share of the budget spent on education. This year, we've seen 12% spent on education. So we're seeing a fall in the share of the budget spent on education. And so instead of seeing a budget which would have had in excess of 150 billion towards education, which is what really was expected this year, the government has only put $94 billion towards education. So where has the remaining $60 billion? Where has that $60 billion gone? That's one thing to have at the back of your mind. The government has actually not spent what it said that it would spend. That is, first of all, raises an interesting question. The second thing I would say is when you look at infrastructure, and especially roads and drains and so on, the government is spending on roads and bridges, just that infrastructure element, 45% more on roads and bridges than on education. If you can imagine something like that, they're spending far more on roads and bridges than the entire education budget. In fact, the government is spending so much on roads, bridges, and drains that it is almost equal to the entire healthcare and education budget combined. Now, folks, we gotta pump the brakes here. We gotta pump the brakes here. You're going to spend on roads, bridges, and drains as much or nearly as much as the entire healthcare system for the country and the entire education system for the country. Does that reflect Guyana's priorities? I mean, yes, roads are important, but are they more important than education and healthcare combined? I think this is very, very alarming. And as much as you see a big budget, the budget is totally misdirected in terms of its development priorities. So that's the broad heading on it. The development priorities are backward. But when you dive into some of the individual elements, and especially when it comes to things like cost of living and so on, as we'll discuss, you see that even within the detail of the budget, there are very alarming questions there as well.
Very interesting opening remarks here by Mr. Elson Lowe about our budget. I find it very interesting. The health and education budget together. Let's put it the other way. The infrastructure budget equals the health and education budget together. Now that's priorities. It seems, therefore, that the government is advancing a developmental praxis that is geared towards buildings and bridges and so on and so forth. Now, as Mr. Lowe said, don't get us wrong. You compare that to education and health care, or developing society. We are moving from one of the poorest economies in the hemisphere. So we are coming into oil with poverty. What's the poverty rate, Mr. Lowe, that you saw from the IDB recently?
They had mentioned 48% poverty, but we believe that it will be higher than that because the cost of living crisis has been pretty severe since they had mentioned that initial figure.
Amen. Amen. Now, I am not the economist, please. But if you're spending it on bridges and all that money on infrastructure, oh boy, the contractors are going to have a field day. You're funneling the money to friends and comrades. The political scientist now is taking over from the economists. Right? Who are the contractors? Friends and comrades. Elson, you touched on cost of living. For me, the two most important things I was looking at is how does the budget treat with this poverty rate that is officially, maybe more than that, as you were saying, unofficially. How does it treat with poverty and this cost of living, which has been skyrocketing from the time the pandemic started 4 years ago? And the two are interlinked. Poverty and cost of living are interlinked. And it seems to me that if one is talking about development in 2022, you have to talk about development of people. And you have to talk about how the people are able to withstand the economic shocks of the pandemic and bad management of the economy. Over to you. How does the budget or not treat the cost of living?
Well,
Go right ahead.
The thing I find, first of all, that is really, again, just unbelievable. So last year, the government only put 5 billion towards mitigating the cost of living crisis, a direct 5 billion. Again, the government has put 5 billion towards mitigating the cost of living crisis. But folks, the budget is 41% larger. So first of all, how can you give the same amount towards mitigating the cost of living crisis when the budget is so much larger? The second thing I would say is that 5 billion last year was less than 1% of the budget, 0.9%. This year, it's 0.6% of the budget. So it is actually a smaller share of the budget. The government has never taken the cost of living crisis seriously, and its efforts have always been these kind of marginal, minuscule efforts as opposed to real and tangible ones. And we must always bear in mind that unlike many other countries that have very difficult economic circumstances right now, we are benefiting from the high oil price, and as a result, we're seeing all of this tremendous growth. Now, the what that also I think indicates is that when it comes to dealing with the cost of living crisis, the government is out of ideas. We in the opposition have proposed several. They've capitulated on one or two. They brought down the price of gasoline, which we had spoken about. But we've also indicated that much more needed to be done in that particular area. As an example, with cant drivers and other folks who are bringing goods from farm to market, we had indicated that they need to receive vouchers for cheap fuel so that we can actually see the cost of goods that are coming from the farm to the market fall. Now, the reason that we really emphasize that particular area is this: it is important to note that poor people, people on the lower end of the income scale, spend a lot of their income on food. Wealthier people spend on food, but they have excess income to spend on other things. Poor people spend a large share of their budget on food. And so our focus was on ensuring that food prices do not get out of hand and we're not seeing the type of runaway inflation that we've seen. Now, government hasn't seemed to get that and therefore hasn't put in place those types of more aggressive measures. As a result, what you've seen in the market is prices going through the roof, where as much as you've seen a wide range of goods go up in price over 30% in just the last year or so. Yeah, a lot of it is also locally produced, local produce that's gone up in substantially in price. That has really, really, really made it difficult for the average Guyanese. And in fact, there's an indication that food inflation last year, at least at the halfway mark, was higher in Guyana than even in the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is where you've seen some of the highest rates of inflation anywhere in the world in terms of the overall inflation rate. So we've had it pretty rough in that regard. The government again, I think, is its priorities are way off in that it has not recognized that last year there was tremendous need for assistance, and this year there's even more need for assistance as inflation continues and as the budget grows and is much larger. Now, the other effect I think we will see, which is really unfortunate, is this. Guyana's budget, it expands, 10 to 15% or so every year. That's historically how it's expanded. For you, if you expand the national budget by 4% last year, the budget that comes out in January, and then you expand this one by 41%, what you're essentially doing is shocking the system with spending that is very swift spending, and that is going to have an inflationary effect. Now, last year, you could see, all right, it's 1 year, there was inflation abroad. But I anticipate that as inflation abroad cools in some areas, inflation again will remain very high. The level of spending is very high, and the share of the budget, excuse me, the measures put in place to deal with inflation are very much minuscule. So that implies that we're going to see the cost of living crisis prolonged in Guyana, even when in other countries it should start to ease. Now, $5 billion is next to nothing regarding a cost of living measure. But I think also the government's efforts to boost agricultural production and so on have not been serious. I don't know if you recall the government talking about planting wheat. They're going to try and produce local wheat and flour and whatnot and bring down. The first thing we mentioned is that would come way too late to do anything about the prices in the market at the time. But secondly, I haven't heard them say one word about that wheat, and a year has passed. I mean, hey, maybe they've got some successful trials, but I don't know why they're keeping the successes so quiet. So that to me is a perfect example of the government not really being serious about dealing with the cost of living crisis in terms of agriculture and agricultural production. What we had indicated, the opposition had indicated, needed to be done, is we need to ensure that farmers can have the best possible equipment so that they can lower their average cost of production so they can be productive. There's a difference between production and productivity. We want to ensure that farmers are able to have equipment so they can produce goods at a cheap price and therefore sell it at a cheaper price to consumers. Of course, this also means they may be able to export their goods, if you're more productive. The example that's from time to time I like to bring up is that the Netherlands is, three or four in terms of agricultural output, but it's right there in the name, Netherlands. There's no land, and yet they produce so much agriculture. That's because they leverage technology and are very productive. So we were calling for grants for farmers to be able to get equipment and leverage technology to boost their yields. That's something that would have an effect quickly, as farmers are able to implement that technology, as opposed to all these harebrained schemes, whether you give away fertilizer or whether you try to plant wheat or I mean, these things are not working, and we need to see the government be more serious in this area.
Thank you very much, my brother, for giving us that overview there of that aspect of the government spending this year. In 2 years, the government has, uh, has increased the spending by over 85% in just 2 years. Because when you're taking last year and this year, it's an astronomical rise in spending. And any layperson knows that you spend in order to improve. And it's the improvement that we are talking about. You come in at the airport and you drive down the East Bank and you see some big houses and big buildings going up, and you say, wow, Guyana developing, until you go in the market, until you go into the villages, until you speak to people, until you speak to older people, until you speak to parents. Now, the social network, I am calling it, the social intervention. I'm talking about old age pension, the little freck that they give to parents, and so on. Talk to us about how was that featured in the budget?
Yes, well, it's been pointed out by GHK Lal that the amounts that you're seeing here are pretty minuscule. When you look at the old age pension increase, a very small increase. When you look at the public assistance, again, $2,000 increase in public assistance from 14,000 to 16,000. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that can live off of $16,000. I mean, really ridiculous. When you look at the children's cash grant, again, a small increase there. When you total all these things up, and really it comes up to 1.7% of the budget, so some insignificant number, of the national budget. And of course, the idea is that this is disposable income; people can spend this, but we must always have a front of mind in Guyana that it's not that we're living in a country where everyone, the country is punishing, the economy is not doing well, things are not working out. We must have front of mind in Guyana that Guyana is growing this year at 25%. Last year grew at 62%. The year before, I believe, it's 20%. The year before that, 43%. Folks, it is a fiction that people try to sell Guyanese that there's no money, that the country, is not making that kind of progress, that you can't expect more. We can't allow them to peddle that fiction. No one believes that, but they're gonna keep trying to push it. We need to ensure always that we're pressing them to provide realistic amounts to people, what they really should be providing to people. And a $2,000 here and a $2,000 there is not gonna cut it. Even when it comes to the tax threshold, they move that from 75,000 to 85,000. That is, what's that, $3,000 benefit people gonna get? I mean, really, really minimal benefits when at the same time the country is making tremendous amounts of money. It is not so long ago that when we looked at a project like Skeldon, it was a couple hundred million US. It was the biggest infrastructure project. It was a big deal. Folks, in Guyana, every couple months, man, yeah, we're making that kind of money without even really realizing it. The huge sums we're making. In fact, by the end of the year, we'll be producing twice as much oil, barrels of oil, twice as many barrels of oil per day as Trinidad in the boom time in Trinidad. So twice as much as that, which is of course why we're going to blow straight past Trinidad in terms of per capita income, right? The per capita wealth, the per person wealth of the country. So then we might have to reflect on this and ask ourselves what should really have been happening in this budget. There are a wide range of anti-poverty measures that we have discussed in the opposition, whether it is salary top-ups, whether it is getting rid of people paying the lower end of the income scale, paying tax at that scale. We had spoken about $135,000. People should not be paying income tax below $135,000 as opposed to this 85,000. But you'll hear in the budget speeches today that you'll hear in the budget speeches soon that we believe that that should be much higher than that. This 85,000 change is totally unrealistic and doesn't even kind of approach what's going on with the country and in terms of what we can do to give Guyanese some relief. But we've also spoken about salary
I,
top-ups as
I,
being
I, go ahead.
Sure, sure. I was just mentioning we've spoken about salary top-ups as a way to assist. We've spoken about student stipends as a way to provide further stimulus and so on. And I give you a fun point that you might find entertaining. So student stipends, the government has mentioned $10 billion towards a $40,000 a month part-time job. Government has mentioned that. Now, first of all, $40,000 a month is next to nothing, right? But we repeatedly want to point out that how is it that the government has not realized that the obvious thing to do, the easiest thing to do, the best thing to do, is to give people training and give them the 40,000 as a stipend. That way, they can build their skills, position themselves to get a higher paying job, and still be able to get some relief. So that to me is remains the height of absurdity in terms of a government policy. The second thing I would say though is that if we're going to give students a $40,000 as a stipend, we can give huge numbers of students without even really scratching the surface of that budget and therefore provide tremendous relief to a large number of people, especially lower income people. As you may recall, students and younger people tend to be on the lower end of the income scale as they're now starting out their careers and so on and so forth. So those are things that could easily be done that would have a big impact. But the government doesn't seem to have any interest in robust policies.
Let me ask you. I was interested in the figure of 12,000 workers in the raising the tax threshold from 75 to 85. That 12,000 workers fall in that small 10,000 range. If we were to do your 135,000, I suspect you would raise that figure now as you intimate. How many more workers would get relief if you were to go to 135,000?
Yeah, so the vast majority of Guyana's workers are on the lower end of the income scale. And if you were to use our measure, you should see maybe 40, 50,000 workers at least benefit from this. But as we had indicated, I believe that this threshold needs to be much higher. And in fact, we want to ensure that we capture most of the workers in the economy with this measure and only leave workers who are really earning at a high level paying taxes, and we'll even look at some of the other measures to give tax relief as we go along. It is not that we wanted people to be paying heavy taxes and so on. It is rather that we believe that as one of the incentives that you can give people for them to work is to give them tax relief. That's an easy way to give people an incentive while also alleviating poverty and helping people to benefit from the gains in the society. So as you're working, you now know that you're going to be able to make more money. You have an added incentive to keep working, put in your hours, and keep striving to move your life forward. So really, the vast majority of Guyanese workers would be covered under our proposals to remove the lower end of income tax, the lower rate of income tax, to stop people being charged that altogether, the 28% rate that people are charged.
And, and Elson, what a living wage at a minimum, at the very minimum? What does a what in what range would
Yeah.
you put a living wage? Give me everything. Give them the money that we have coming in from oil. Give them the size of the workforce. Give them cost of living. What would be a living wage
Yeah.
in Guyana in January of 2023?
Well, what we have said previously is that really no one should be paid less than $150,000 in Guyana, whether that is through some of our mechanisms like topping up your salary, tax relief, and so on, in addition to gradually raising the minimum wage. But no one should realistically be making less than 150,000. However, we must also reflect that the country is growing at a tremendous rate. And so the 150,000 of last year is not going to be the 150,000 of this year. We're going to have to continue to raise that bar. Again, let us reflect on the fact that by the end of the year, Guyana will be richer per person than Trinidad and Tobago. And if it wouldn't fly in Trinidad, it shouldn't be flying in Guyana. And from that perspective, that's really our minimum here. We're looking at 150,000, and really this year we're going to see the opposition speak more about a $200,000 being the level at which Guyanese should be earning, and being the level below which we should not see Guyanese paying any tax at all. That's going to be really our conversation, because as the country grows, we have to grow along with it in terms of what we believe should be the base that citizens are offered. But we must also, I think, not think about things only as what is the minimum that we can get, what is the least that we can get. We must cast our eyes more to the question of what opportunities do we see out there, what direction do we believe that this country should go, how should this country really what should it look like. I see someone there mentioning $300,000 per month. What I would tell you is really in a few years we need to see Guyanese earning the type of salaries that you'll earn in the developed world, because what is happening is after you've surpassed Trinidad, there's not a whole lot of other countries in the Western Hemisphere for you to surpass before you're at the United States and Canada in terms of GDP per capita. And if you look at the trajectory of the growth of the country and of the budget of the country, Guyana will be in just a couple of years producing over 800,000 barrels of oil per person. So that's every single day we're producing more oil than people in the country, more barrels of oil than people in the country. That's the trajectory we're headed here. And so while we're talking about the $200,000 now, that is not in any way where we want to end up or what the vision must be. The vision must be that in a short space of time, people are living the type of comfortable life that you might be living in a Norway or something, where you have a very good standard of living and where you have a lot of disposable income. So we're going to head in that direction. And over a period of time, that's where we should be going. But that requires, of course, deliberate policies, first of all, to eradicate poverty, but second of all, to grow the economy. And the coalition is going to put forward and has already put forward some policies to that effect. And you're going to see that in the course of our various budget speeches. The first one, though, that we really want to call out the government on, because we believe that the government is really sleeping on this particular one, is the Small Business Bureau. Now, the Small Business Bureau in Guyana is supposed to provide loans to small businesses to help them to develop. And we know that small businesses are great, provide a lot of employment for people. Of course, we want to also see people be empowered by being able to start their own business. But the Small Business Bureau will give people a 500,000 grant and these types of things, which any business person will tell you you can't do anything with $500,000. How are you supposed to employ staff or expand your business or do some research on a product or build out your shop with $500,000? That's next to nothing. And the budget for the Small Business Bureau this year is $587 million. Folks, again, that is, that's not 1% of this national budget. That is a tremendously low number. That is, I mean, it's almost not worth mentioning in a budget of $782 billion. All you're going to give to the Small Business Bureau, the main engine when it comes to small finances, small businesses from the government, is a $500 million. That's all you're going to give them out of $781 billion. That is the height of absurdity. And the Small Business Bureau could easily have 10 times as large of a budget, and it wouldn't even be anywhere near what it really should be. That agency is one where we believe a lot of focus needs to be put. We believe we need to look closely at it to ensure that it is as user friendly as possible, that people are able to put forward their applications. We know that there are concerns that people believe that some of their ideas can be stolen. Those things are totally unacceptable and need to be dealt with. But the idea that you can just give people a little 500,000, and everything is cool, that's not acceptable. What we need to see is millions being given out to small businesses so they can properly expand and hire some people. And that's on the lower end of things. What we also want to see is that larger sums can be given to entrepreneurs who may now be starting out but who have a good idea. We this 500,000 game can't fly. And when you look at a budget that is $782 billion, for you to give something as important as small businesses 500 million is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And my God, when you hear the numbers for some sections and sectors in the economy, it's stunning when compared to these very, very important sectors that are critical to raising the standard of life,
Yeah.
raising the standard of living. Anything in the budget that tackles poverty?
Well, one of the things I would challenge your users to reflect on: how often does the Minister of Finance mention the word poverty? Not often, right? Doesn't talk about it. How often does he say the word inequality? Doesn't talk about it. That's for a reason. That's because they don't have any interest in that. That's not the focus of their policy making. They're not here like us trying to figure out, all right, well, how can we ensure that in a society of plenty, those at the lower end are not in a difficult position, that they're positioned so that they can get higher paying jobs in the long run, so that they're positioned so that they can better the lives of their children and so on. They're not looking at those types of things. Rather, as we mentioned earlier, their focus is on friends, family, and favorites. And so the budget doesn't really have any emphasis on poverty alleviation. I'll tell you a simple one. Someone mentioned to me actually that as much as there's all this talk about house lots, no one is talking about the homeless. I mean, how is it so we really intend to have a tremendously wealthy society and nobody's going to do anything about homeless people and ensuring that they are able to live comfortably? This is the type of nonsense that we're hearing a lot from the government. And on the topic of housing, listen, 20,000 house lots, which they're claiming, is not 20,000 homes. It is important for us to recognize the context within which we live, where a lot of people do not have access to finance. So even if you lower the mortgage rates and so on, they can't get access to these loans. Their salaries are too low for them to probably be able to afford these loans. They also do not necessarily have the best credit. I know a lot of people that owe various agencies, or they buy a microwave, or they buy a stove, they'll buy a dryer or something, or they buy a chair set, and they owe these sorts of agencies a lot of money, and for a long period of time. So I think what has happened is that we people are not really in a position to be able to build quickly in the way that we'd like to see. And so you'll see proposals coming out in the budget speeches from our MPs and our leader that deal directly with things like housing, that take the problem seriously, and that understand the scale of the problem, because it is not a small scale problem, but but a very, very serious issue.
What about job creation? What is projected in the budget?
Yeah. So the budget speaks about job creation in a couple of ways that are uh, mystifying. The first being the budget talks about call centers and so on and so forth. Oh, there's a couple more call centers. Then it talks about, oh, there's more money for part-time jobs. Uh, this is what we're looking forward to in the country that's the fastest growing in the world, in a country that's going to blow straight past Trinidad in terms of income per capita, in the country that many are saying, oh, it will end up like Dubai or Norway. We're looking at call centers and part-time jobs. Now, of course, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people who work. If you like working in a call center, that's fine. But what I'm saying is we should be aiming much, much higher than that. This is not at all what we should be expecting Guyanese to be doing here. That is a start, a job, but it is not something at all to boast about in the national budget. We need to see people earning high wages. We're going to say in our budget speeches, we're going to talk about value added products and manufacturing. But we're not just talking about it for the sake of a buzzword, but it's because we want to ensure that you have productive industries that can pay people well. So it is not manufacturing everybody stand up on a line and canning goods or something, or doing some sort of low wage type of manufacturing. What we're talking about is ensuring that we have manufacturing in this country that can leverage technology, or you train workers for technical tasks, where you have workers who are working along with sophisticated machinery, so that those workers are earning high wages, while at the same time we're able to produce and export value added goods. And we've got proposals that we'll put out, which are obvious things that should have been done a long time now, that we believe will have an immediate and huge impact. Now, the government, when it talks about manufacturing, oh, we've seen a little increase in manufacturing here. We're encouraging manufacturing. They don't deal with it seriously. We're going to deal with it seriously, and especially agro manufacturing, agro processing, whether it is tinned fruits, whether it is the production of juices and so on for export. We get a lot of that stuff from Trinidad, but we should be able to export, given that we grow so much of that type of produce. And of course, as we talk about farmers getting access to machinery to boost their production and lower their cost of production, it is with manufacturing and agro processing in mind. That is an area where Guyana has real advantages. And as a result of having real advantages, where we really should be focusing on building out our manufacturing. So that's the type of jobs that's the type of jobs proposal we're talking about. High level manufacturing, training people being able to earn high wages in those industries. That's what we're talking about in terms of jobs, not call centers and part-time jobs and these types of feeble excuses for efforts. The government, I believe, thinks that if they just put money into construction, that will generate all the jobs in the world. They won't have to worry about it. And while yes, construction does generate some jobs, not everybody is going to be working in construction. Number one, and number two, we want people to be earning high wage jobs, and construction jobs are not always the highest wage jobs. We as
Eh,
Guyanese must recognize in of ourselves that the country is immensely wealthy. And if you have an immensely wealthy country, it is the responsibility of the government to give you every possible assistance to help you to get a good job, with a high paying job that can help you to live comfortably with your family. You should be able to afford to send your children to school comfortably. You should be able to travel. You should be able to save. You should be able to have a good vehicle. You should be able to go around this country and enjoy the beauty that is Guyana. It should not be that people are struggling day to day if we have a tremendously wealthy country. And unfortunately, the government's lack of a focus on these sorts of things is leading Guyanese nowhere. Now, we've talked about training and student stipends and so on, but it is not, oh, we're just looking to give people money. It is a deliberate method, a deliberate plan to ensure that Guyanese are able to upskill, to build their skills and capacities so that they can get these high paying jobs. And of course, the oil sector has many such jobs. We believe that we must be aggressive in training Guyanese to fill these jobs. We must ensure that as many of these jobs as possible are filled by Guyanese so that we can have the benefit of the oil and gas sector. Yes, you will need some labor because, of course, Guyanese are not already trained. But we can't be living in a Guyana where we're just not going to do what is required to equip people to make money and have high paying jobs and let foreign folks just come and take all the jobs. That's absurd. And I submit to you that none of the founding fathers from any political party would be in agreement with that.
Young, you're really dishing it out here tonight. Elson, last year's budget, we saw what they did in terms of money to the regions that were in the control of the PPP. We saw a rise in monies going to them, and regions like Region 4, which is in the control of the opposition, we saw. Have you had a chance to look at that allocation of funds?
Well, one of the key things that we want to introduce into the discussion is this. Regional development is not regional development for regional development's sake. We have to be deliberate, thoughtful, serious about regional development. We must recognize the different regions have different advantages, and we must do what we can to link different regions so that we have a more cohesive both development and country. So, various regions, as far as agriculture goes, you may have heard the leader of the opposition say that we need to see agriculture developed across the different regions. That is something that we're going to bring into the discussion and focus the discussion because we believe that various regions have a lot of advantages when it comes to agriculture. The regions are very varied, and so you can have different types of agriculture. And in fact, regions can be self sustaining, can be food secure easily. Guyana is blessed with the fact that virtually everything or most things grow in Guyana with ease. But if you don't have these things, don't treat these things as central to your policies, you end up with all manner of absurdity and with regions that shouldn't be getting amounts that they're getting. And you end up playing political games with the regional allocations. So we want to approach regional development from the perspective that all the different regions of Guyana need to develop, not just those where, first of all, your support base might be, or those where you have a lot of people, but we need to see across the country regions develop. And we would point out that in many countries across the world, developed economies, you're walking down the street in a small town in the US, the sidewalk is just as good as the sidewalk in downtown Manhattan. That's because they take seriously regional development. It is not that there's no sidewalk and there's a mud street you're walking along in even rural parts of the US. It's consistent. They recognize the value of their regions. They recognize the value of infrastructure that links the regions. And so, in the course of the budget discussions, you're going to see us come out with various proposals and a structure as to how we want to see regional development take place, and recognizing that there's a lot of potential in various regions of Guyana.
Uh, if you were to rate this budget on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, 1, of course, the lowest, as far as the budget caters to real all-round development, how would you rate this budget?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that I think this is a really fundamental point here. The the PvP doesn't seem to understand that this is a country that produces oil, and there are specific challenges when it comes to development that one must face in an oil economy. That things like poverty alleviation and inequality are very, very important, because you've seen so many countries that produce a lot of oil but have tremendous levels of poverty. Equatorial Guinea, which had a higher per capita GDP than Spain, but had 75% poverty, is the poster child for that. They don't seem to approach these fundamental questions that have been debated and discussed by economists the world over. When you talk about things like the resource curse, the paradox of plenty, Dutch disease, when you talk about the challenges that our economies face, they don't seem to engage with that at all. So, because they don't engage with that at all, I mean, you can't give this budget anything more than like a one or a two, because what has happened is that the budget's priorities is so backward. That's something like education. Now, I just said to you that we need to train people to fill jobs in the oil and gas sector. I just said that to you. And you're going to tell me that you're actually going to shrink the share of the budget spent on education? We have, this is the situation in which you will be looking to massively grow your investment in education. And they have themselves acknowledged it by saying they want to spend 20% of the budget on education. But instead of doing that, they have gone in the opposite direction and are actually shrinking each year the share of the budget spent on education. It's totally, totally wrong headed and absolutely absurd. And what has happened is that because that education budget, if you say it's 20% of the budget, it should be 150, $160 billion. So they've got a $94 billion budget when it's supposed to be 150, 160 billion. So they got about a $60 billion gap, which is where they're spending less than they themselves said they would spend. 60 billion less than they themselves said they would spend. But let me put it to you this way. What could you do with this 60 billion? Well, you could easily make the University of Guyana free, which they continue to drag their feet on, to the point that university students are, some of them, quite astonished and despondent. That's 4 billion there. You could pump additional billions into the university, first of all, to improve pay, but second of all, to improve the facilities of the university. You know, Singapore University, even though Singapore is a small country, is one of the best universities in the world. That is where we need to be going with the University of Guyana. Not just, oh, you get them a slight same 3 billion or so, or almost the same 3 billion or so every year is what you're giving the University of Ghana. It needs to be dealt with in a way where we believe that over a period of time, the University of Ghana will become one of the best universities in the world, just like Singapore University or Oslo University. I believe in Norway it's Oslo University. Those types of universities are very well regarded. That is where we need to be going. That could be, again, billions of dollars that could be spent. And then, in terms of student stipends to train this population, to get people on board, you could easily afford $40,000 stipends for 50,000 people. And you would not be spending any, the 60 billion that they're talking about. You would still have tens of billions of dollars left over. Now, we have not heard anything for teachers. You could easily raise teacher salaries with that money. You could substantially raise teacher salaries with that money. You could invest in better classrooms with that money. You could invest more aggressively in oil and gas training with that money. So there is obvious areas where there is a need in terms of education. There's obvious benefits to the country in terms of investing in education. And there's huge amounts that they have simply chosen not to spend, even though they said that they were going to do that.
Elson Lowe, I can't let you go without asking your perspective on what we just saw at Moko. You're a young man. You obviously love your country and want to see your country rise to heights that your parents and grandparents could not imagine. But when you look at Moko, what are your thoughts?
One of the things that I've tried to stress and tell guys, which is really critical for us as a nation if we're forward as a nation and get over the historic tensions and discrimination, so on, that we've seen, is this: we must be proud of the successes of the various races in this country, and we must support each other. When you hear about villages that freed slaves purchase ancestral lands and establish communities, for me personally, that is a point of great pride. That is something that every Guyanese should be proud of, because not in every country where you've had slavery did you see freed slaves be able to pull together themselves, be organized, establish communities, and move themselves forward. So we should treat places like Maka, where there are claims of ancestral lands, like many of the villages around this country where there are claims of ancestral lands and documentation. We should treat them sensitively. We should understand that they are in their own way monuments to Guyanese excellence and of our history that we should be proud of. And it doesn't matter your ethnicity. You should be proud to say that Mocha is a place where ancestral lands exist and people of African descent pull themselves forward, and use that as an example of how we as a country can move forward and develop. Now, similarly, when you see accomplishments or you see things that other members of other races are happy about, I know that many of my Indian brothers and sisters were very happy that Rishi Sunak became the UK PM after Churchill, of course, had made some very disparaging remarks about people of Indian descent. And I am very happy for them, because I can see that it is something that means a lot to a lot of people of Indian descent. Now, maybe Mr. Sunak won't turn out to be the best PM, but I can be happy for them. We as a country need to be happy for each other, to take pride in each other's accomplishments, and to understand that that is a big part of what it means to be a Guyanese. Now, the government being so insensitive with the people, the residents of Maka, bulldozing people's houses, forcing people out of the way, even though the road was not passing in the way of the people's houses, is the opposite of how they should have operated. And we as a nation need to do better than that. And any government needs to operate with a sense of recognize, rather, the history of this country, what is valuable about our history, and that it is something that we, first of all, are proud of, and our future generations, we want them to be proud of. But instead, we have to be embarrassed about what happened at Moko.
Young Elson Lowe, thank you so much, my brother, for coming through tonight as always and helping us to make sense of the national budget. The national budget is perhaps the most important stop in the calendar of any nation. And I'm sure as the debates take off in Parliament, hopefully we don't kind of cost down that we have seen in recent times, and that we can have a proper discourse on the challenges that we face and how not dealt with those challenges. Our we can only be richer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having.
And to you, audience, thank you so much. Young man, quite accomplished, quite bright, gave a good account of himself and a good account of the national budget. We shall continue to cover the budget as we go forward. Tomorrow night, of course, I'm here for the Thursday night edition. Thank you all so much again for coming through. Without you, there is no Politics 101. And without Politics 101 and other programs. When you leave here, you're going over to Shara Duncan, and then Mark will bring the curtain down at 9 o'clock. We do make our contribution. We contribute towards enriching the discussions and mobilizing and ready you to deal with the challenges of contemporary Guyana. We have made Guyana richer. This communion in the evening, we have made our country richer. Guyana has changed in terms of people's access to information, in terms of people's access to what goes on behind the news. There is still room for the traditional media, but the traditional media itself have to understand that the world is changing, and we are part of the changing world. We come here every night and we learn and we teach. And our country, despite all its problems, despite the challenges for half of the population, those who voted for the opposition, despite those challenges, we can still look on the brighter side. Because as the Black Stallion said, the brighter side is where we go in. And we're going to make sure that we all share in that bright side. Good evening to our Amerindian brothers who are often left out of the conversation, or Amerindian sisters and brothers who are often left out of the national conversation. If you are in the audience, good evening. If you're not in the audience, please tell them that we love them too. Good evening to our East Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters who are joining us and who are doing what young Lowe says, is that we must be glad for each other. And we can only be glad for each other if we understand each other, we understand our individual histories. Good evening to you, our East Indian brothers and sisters, including those who are PPP members and PPP supporters. We understand the PPP is turning you all into lawless people. And that is not good. You all must fight back. Don't let them send you on a program like this to make yourself a jackass, because you are not jackasses. You are human beings. Good evening to you. And to say we love you, our Indian brothers and sisters, because we're all here. We all come on some ship, whether it's the Middle Passage or coming here after slavery. We all came on the same ship. And to those in our society who have blazed the trail, who have become rich in an honest way, we say, hail up to you. To those who are becoming rich on the backs of the poor, we say to you to change your ways. We understand that a lot of people, including a lot of our own African Guyanese people, are hanging their mouths where the soup is dropping. But remember, soup could be hot. Soup could be hot, and your mouth can get burned. Time is longer than twine. Time longer than twine. Those who are selling out the people, those who are selling out the poor for a little freck, those who are leading the poor in the wrong direction for a little freck. History has not been kind to such people. History has not been kind to such people. There may be statute of limitations in the courts, but there's no statute of limitation when it comes to the wrath of the ancestors and the wrath of the people. There's no statute of limitation. We will remember. We will remember you knelt on the back of that woman in Morocco. We will remember. We will remember that you shot Quinton Bacchus. We will remember. There's something called historical memory. There's no statute of limitations. So I'm saying to my Black brothers, whether you're in the police force or the army or wherever, stop what you're doing. Stop joining the oppressors. Stop carrying out the bidding of the oppressors for a few $1,000s. There's no statute of limitations when it comes to the wrath of the ancestors. Brother Black Stallion said, Peter, wait, Peter, wait. Peter, look, Ian's by the gate. He said, when he go up to heaven, he want to walk with Peter. Peter, wait, Peter, wait. Francis Drake by the gate, leave him to me. Peter, wait, Peter, wait. Look, the woman who bring troops in the Caribbean. Very significant calypso. Many of us will be there for a work with Peter. And if you don't want, as Black Stalin said, burn them. If you don't want to burn in the fires of hell, stop what you're doing, because we will not forget. And there's no statute of limitations. You all were born better. You all were raised better. Stop killing your brothers and your sisters. Stop carrying out the works of the oppressor. There's no statute of limitations when it comes to dealing with the wrath of the ancestors. No statute of limitations. Good evening. Tomorrow night we come back to continue our business. Tomorrow night we come back to continue our mobilizing. Tomorrow we come back to prepare, continue preparing to defend ourselves. Self-defense. Self-defense. Tomorrow we come back to continue our love fest. Tomorrow night we come back to continue our date with destiny. Our date with destiny. As we walk through the gates of enslavement and indentureship, our destiny is freedom. Not just freedom for some, but freedom for all. Not just an unequal freedom, but an equal freedom. Our date with destiny. We continue tomorrow night.